Hi, and welcome to a brand new lesson where we'll be looking at graphing. We're going to be using a table to graph those straight lines, and we're also going to be using a table in the challenge section to graph nonlinear equations. Things like parabolas or those other kind of weird shapes you might see. So, let's get to it, shall we? Here we go. Graphing straight lines. Here we go. First off, though, of course, what do you just to start off with something fun and hopefully exciting, what do you call it when a dinosaur gets in a car accident? Well, you call it a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Tyrannosaurus Rex. Oh my gosh, that's awesome. All right, let's get to the math. Today we're talking about graphing a straight line. So we have to remember a couple of things. The first thing is, here's your coordinate plane. And on your coordinate plane, you have the x-axis and you have the y-axis. And don't forget, whenever you have a coordinate, it always goes x comma y. So it tells you, starting from the origin, which is at 0, 0, where you have to be going. So if you had something like -2, 3, so that was the coordinate you had to go find on your coordinate plane. So if that's what you had to do, the -2 is the x, and the 3 is the y. So that means from the origin, I would go 1, 2, and then I would go up 3, 1, 2, 3, like this. And that's where that point is. Okay, so quick little review. And today we're just going to look at how to graph a straight line. The first thing I do want to talk about, though, is this format. And that format is y equals mx plus b. So this is going to be important for a few reasons, for a lot of things over the next few kind of lessons. M is your slope. So how steep is the line? The x, of course, is your kind of x coordinate. And the y here, the y, can be your y coordinate. And the b is really, really cool. This is the y-intercept. This is where it crosses the y-axis. And it's always going to be 0, comma, whatever that number is, 0, comma, b. So this is called slope-intercept form. And that's what that little equation is. And you're going to see most things in slope-intercept form. And you might see things in a different form, and that's called standard. But I just want to kind of point this one out, because this is going to be the one that we're going to be using the most. So what are we talking about today? We're talking about graphing a straight line using a table. So if I gave you this equation, y equals, let's start off pretty easy, 2x plus 1. I want to know, what does that look like if I was going to graph it on this line? What is that going to look like? And there's going to be different ways to solve that, to actually answer that question, but we're going to learn how to use a table today. So here's our table. And the idea for the table is to kind of plug in some numbers. Actually, I would do that. Let's go to that line. To plug in some numbers for x and then figure out what the y is. How does that sound? So I'm going to put down the equation here, 2x plus 1. And now I get to go and pick numbers for x, any number I want, plug it in. So I'm going to go and plug in whatever I choose for x. I'm going to plug it in right here. I'm going to plug it in there and get an answer for the y. How does that sound? Does that sound pretty good? Okay. What number should I choose? What is the best number to choose? The easiest one, of course, and the easiest one is going to be choosing 0, also choosing 1, and depending on what kind of math teacher you have, they might want you to use a negative number. Ooh, a negative number. And yeah, I like using negative numbers. I'm going to use -2, just because I like using -2. So I'm just going to plug those in now. So we have 3 different things. So when x is 0, so when it says 2 times 0 plus 1, that is going to equal y. What is 2 times 0 plus 1? That's just going to be 1. So I'm going to put the 1 there. How about when x is 1? So 2 times 1 plus 1. So that's going to be 2 plus 1. That's going to be 3. And how about when x is negative 2? What's that going to be? That is going to be negative 3. So that was negative 4 plus 1, so negative 3. So those are my coordinates. So that means that when x is 0, y is 1. So my coordinate, my actual coordinate would be 0, comma 1. The other one would be 1, comma 3. And then I'd have negative 2, negative 3. Now I always choose 3 numbers because I'm going to plot those 3 numbers here. So let me just go and just kind of make up some lines here. Ideally, you're using probably some graph paper for this, but you can sketch it out, and that's really all we want to know, that you can do this. I'm going to go and plot 0, 1. So there's 0, 1 right there. And I'm going to go plot 1, 3. So 1, 1, 2, 3 right there. And then the third dot, this is why we use 3 choices for x, because I want to double check. If the next dot that I put on here isn't in a line, like you make a triangle, you know something's gone wrong. So this is kind of like your insurance. So I'm going to go backwards 2, negative 2, I'm going to go down 3 like this. And there we go. And oh my gosh, we do have a straight line. That is going to be a straight line. It's very exciting. And it's going to go straight through it, just like that. I'm going to put little arrows on the end because the line goes on forever. And we've used a table to go and graph. Easy peasy. Could you choose any other different numbers than those ones? Sure. You definitely could. I like those numbers just because I did. But the big thing to take away, always use 3 numbers. So 3 numbers. And I highly recommend always using 0 and 1, and then choose your favorite negative number. Let's take a look at another one to talk about good choices, because we're all about making good choices, aren't we? So here's the equation. Y equals 1 quarter plus, 1 quarter x, I should say 1 quarter x plus, should I go 1? Sure. So there's our equation. And when you're choosing numbers and you are dealing with something that has a fraction, when you're choosing numbers, you're always going to choose 0 because we love 0. But the other numbers you're going to choose, I would highly recommend choosing numbers that have factors of the denominator. Does that make sense? So the reason I want to do that is because it's going to make your life way easier. So I'm going to show you some examples there. So the first number you're always going to choose is going to be 0. Would you go and choose 1? I wouldn't, because 1 doesn't work really well with a quarter. I would go and choose 4. Now why is that? Well, a quarter times 4, so just kind of think about it. A quarter times 4 is what? A quarter times 4 is going to be just 1. That's a great number. I'm going to put that right over there right now. We already know that. So we do want to kind of keep that in mind. And then if you had to choose, like some kids go here and just instantly choose 1. So they go a quarter times 1, which is just a quarter, plus 1. So it's 1 and a quarter. Would you want to use 1 and a quarter when graphing? Not really. Not really. You probably wouldn't. So that's kind of why I liked using 4 there. Now, if I used a positive 4, maybe I'll go and I'll use a negative 4, because that just kind of makes sense. So a negative 4 would just make this being negative 1. Oh, sorry, no, it doesn't. So you would end up getting a quarter times negative 4, which is going to be negative 1, and negative 1 plus 1. So negative 1 plus 1 is going to be 0. And now that I go and think about this, when it was 4, is that really 1? No, it's 2. I was testing you. Did you go and figure that out? Hopefully you guys did. So there we go. There's our proper table. Just checking to see if you're paying attention. And let's go and graph it. So 0, 1 is about there. Notice how I'm just kind of estimating this. And 4, 2 is probably around here. And negative 4, 0 is something like that. Is this a straight line? Yeah, it's a straight line. It sure is. So we're going to do something like that. And something like this. And there we go. So that was all about making good choices. Making good choices for graphing a straight line using a table. Hopefully that clears that up, and we're moving on to challenge. Here we go. Okay, so that was graphing a straight line. But what happens when the line is not straight? We can still use a table, input a few more values, and see what it looks like. Let's get to it, shall we? Here we go. Let's talk challenge, and we're talking about nonlinear graphs. Still using a table, and we're going to take a look at some of the common nonlinear graphs that you might be facing in the upcoming days. First though, what do you get when you cross a dinosaur with a pig? Dinosaur and a pig. You get a porkosaurus. Oh, yes, the dinosaur jokes continue. So we're talking about nonlinear graphs. So let's remember that basically a linear equation is going to be in the form of y equals x. And whenever you have y equals x, you're going to be getting basically a straight line. So you're going to be getting a line that's kind of going like this. You're going to get that line. One little thing to kind of get in the habit of, sometimes we say y equals x, but sometimes you're also going to hear something called f of x. So f of x, so this is kind of weird, saying the function of the value of x is going to be this. That's what we're kind of saying. And f of x equals x. But just remember that f of x is really y. So if you ever see something that says f of x, just think that is y. And then that will kind of just clear things up for you. So I'm going to be writing down y equals for all of this, but do realize that you might see some things that say f of x. Okay, so let's take a look at the common examples that we need to know. So I'm going to be kind of flying through these. Let's take a look at y is equal to the absolute value of x. So if you had that kind of a graph, what would it be looking like? If you had that, you're going to get a V graph, basically, boing, like this. And that's just for you to know. And we'll talk about that y in a little while. Another one that's going to be really, really popular for us is y equals x squared, which is going to be a quadratic. So what does a quadratic look like? And that's kind of when you get a parabola. It's kind of like this. I like to call these ones the happy face ones. Yay, look, he's happy, and stuff. So that's going to be very popular, especially this year, probably this stage of your developmental math stuff. And then there's some really just weird ones. So let's take a look at some weird ones. How about y equals 1 over x? So y equals 1 over x. So these are things that we call an inverse function. So this is an inverse function. And for an inverse function, you're going to get a couple of different things going on. You're going to be getting something that's going to be kind of like going around this in quadrant 1, kind of like that. And you're going to be getting another one like this. It's pretty cool. That's an inverse function. And let's start taking a look of the y. So why is this happening? Why does that happen? So basically, again, we're going to be using tables. So you want to be choosing. I know in the standard I was saying you should probably just choose 3 numbers. But when you're dealing with the kind of the funky ones, you want to be choosing more than 3. So you definitely want to be kind of increasing this maybe to like 5. 5 is probably pretty good to get a good idea. And you want to be using positives and negatives for sure, definitely. So for here, I'm going to go and choose, I'll tell you the ones that I like to choose. I like to choose 2, 1, 0, -1, and -2. Okay, so those are the classic numbers that I like to choose. And then you just plug them in. Again, it's the same idea. You're plugging them in and seeing what happens. So if I plug 2 into here, so if I put a 2, right there, the absolute value of 2 is 2. Okay, so if I went and instead I went and I didn't plug in the 2, if I plugged in 1, so you get the idea. So I plug in 1 here, the absolute value of 1 is 1, the absolute value of 0 is 0, and then the absolute value of -1 is also 1, and the negative 2, the absolute value of that is going to be positive 2. So that's why you start getting this kind of graph. So if I was going to go and plot that, that'd be like 0, 0. This would be like 1, 1. This would be 2, 2. This would be -1, 1. This would be -2, 2, and so on and so forth. So we're using the exact same idea, and you can go and do this for all of these kinds of going and plugging in those numbers, and you can choose different numbers if you like, but I like to stick with those ones. I think those ones are pretty solid. Now you might want to change those depending on maybe what the equations look like, but I like choosing that 2, that 1, that 0, that 1, and I got to sneak in another one there because I like to use 5 numbers. I like to use 5 numbers because it gives you a good range of how everything looks. And plug that one in. I used to plug them in, and then there you go. You start taking a look at that. But if you have an idea of what some of these basic ones look like, that would be a good start. So there's a couple of other ones that we should probably talk about. And a couple other ones is, we've been talking about radicals lately. So, so what does the y equals the square root of x? So what does that look like? And if you have that one, it's going to be kind of looking like, that, which is pretty neat. And some other ones, how about some cubes? How about y equals, what's the cube of x? So this one, and usually students like this one. This is a pretty neat one. Again, this one's going to be kind of going like that. Something like that. And let's finish it off with, should we do one more? Those are probably the only ones that you really need to know. And again, we're using a table, and we're plugging in numbers, and we're seeing how everything works. So that's about it. This just kind of gets you an idea of how you would go and do it. The takeaways for all of us is you need to choose 5 numbers. So you want to choose 5 numbers and plug those in, because I keep drawing 4 boxes, because you are going to be needing that, and sometimes you even go 7 numbers, but for the most part these 5 numbers will get you going and you'll be able to graph it, and there you go. Taking a look at nonlinear equations. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks everybody for tuning in to this edition of Math with Mr. Douglas. Hopefully you guys took something away and you can now graph a straight or non-straight line. Till next time, cheers.